Welcome to another edition of Diplomatic Channel. I'm Amarachi Ubani. This week, Israel announces a pause along the southern Gaza route to allow in aid. It's not a ceasefire like all parties have been expecting, but it would allow for aid to get to civilians living in parts of Gaza Strip that really need it. According to the Israel Defense Forces, the pause began on Saturday and will take place every day from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. local time, until further notice to allow trucks move from the Kerem Shalom crossing, the main entry point for incoming aid to southern Gaza, up the Salah al-Adin road and northwards. Israel's campaign in Gaza has triggered a humanitarian crisis. A bottleneck of aid has built up at Kerem Shalom amid airstrikes and fighting in much of southern Gaza. The pause comes as Muslims around the world celebrate the Eid al-Adha, symbolizing the closeness to the Almighty through prayers and righteous deeds. However, the announcement of the military pause almost immediately triggered a furious political assault from far-right government ministers and a rapid defense from Israel's army, insisting it does not signal an end to the fighting in southern Gaza or any change to the entry of humanitarian aid. We'll be exploring soon the possibility of a ceasefire in Gaza and why it may not work with Hamas. My guest this week is international relations expert, Dr. Charles Chukwunaru. In the meantime, what's all this talk about peace talks in Ukraine? President Volodymyr Zelensky has what he considers a simple solution to ending the war with Russia. That's Diplomatic Channel in a wrap. Let's check in on other discussions in diplomatic circles, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Israel is under pressure to allow aid into Gaza, and the government thinks a military pause will help, while negotiations are ongoing for a lasting ceasefire. Last week, the UN adopted a U.S. ceasefire plan that would ensure this in 3 phases, but Hamas is not on board. It says it has seen no commitment from Israel. Why is a ceasefire so difficult to attain in the Middle East? Let's see if my guests can attempt the answers. Joining me now to discuss the U.S. proposed ceasefire in Gaza and what the Israeli and Hamas side make of it is international relations, conflict management, and security expert, Dr. Charles Chukwunaru. He joins me from Alberta, Canada. Dr. Chukwunaru, thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you, Amarachi. It's always a pleasure.
And I have to say Happy Father's Day to you, the only day in the year when fathers are remembered and celebrated around the world. Happy Father's Day to you, sir.
Thank you very much, even though it's not as loud as Mother's Day.
Yeah, well, I guess you have to live with it, take what you can, right? We do appreciate our fathers. So let's go into the conversation fully now. Do you think that Israel has accepted a ceasefire with Hamas?
Or put another way, if you allow me to rephrase your question, could it be that Hamas has accepted the peace deal with Israel? Because the last peace deal that was put up by the Biden administration and backed by the UN Security Council resolution was actually tagged Israeli peace proposal. So the burden of acceptance shifted to Hamas, not Israel. So if I take it to be, do I think Hamas accepted the peace deal from Israel? My answer is no. And even before Hamas came up with their response, we had always known that Hamas wasn't going to accept it because it is not in Hamas's interest for permanent ceasefire or peace deal or return to for Gaza to return to the path of peace. I don't think Hamas is an organization that I don't think it's a peaceful organization. Permit me to go a little bit down memory lane. You discover that Hamas preaches violence. You recall that Hamas vowed to wipe out Israel as a proxy of Iran, as uh, one of the axes of resistance headed by Iran. So you have Hamas in Gaza, Palestine. You have the Houthis in Yemen. You have uh, the Hezbollah in Lebanon. You have the Islamic Jihad in Iraq, in Syria, and also in Gaza. So it's not just Hamas. And when you look at the U.S. peace deal, I knew for sure, and I think I said that to you, that Hamas will not accept it. And it is very important to note that Hamas is not the only violent actor in Gaza. You also have Islamic Jihad, and they are all controlled from Iran. And Iran is not going to accept it anyway, because it's in their interest for the war to continue, to rally
Yes,
international.
but you know, the ceasefire, the proposed ceasefire that the U.S. is proposing is between Israel and Hamas. And I'll tell you why I asked that first question about whether you think Israel has accepted the ceasefire, because it was the U.S. government that said Israel had accepted the ceasefire. Hamas does not believe that Israel has accepted the ceasefire because it says no Israeli official has verbally professed it. So do you think that Hamas is right in believing that even though the U.S. might think that Israel has accepted the ceasefire, it really hasn't, because no Israeli official has confessed that, has affirmed that the ceasefire deal has been accepted?
Okay, I get the context. I get the context of it. Okay, so in that sense, Hamas might not be far from the truth by saying no Israeli, when they say no Israeli official, I think they are talking about the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. Bibi Netanyahu said, even when the US was making the announcement, he said the Israeli goal in the war objective is still to eliminate Hamas and return all the hostages. So Hamas didn't see that as Hamas wasn't comfortable with that statement coming at the same time the US was tagging the proposal, Israeli proposed ceasefire. But on the other hand, the government of Israel did not say it was not their proposal. They were not. The government of Israel was not against it. So to the extent that the Israel proposal, the Israel government did not disown it, Hamas cannot put words in their mouth. So it was Israeli proposal, and it was passed by the UN Security Council. Israel owned it because they did not disown it. So it is not the position. Hamas is not in the position to disown the proposal on behalf of Israel.
But the ceasefire is from the United States. I mean, Antony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, has been in the Middle East trying to implore on all sides, trying to help negotiate the ceasefire deal with all sides, even with Arab neighbors of Israel and the Palestinians to accept this ceasefire, but Hamas is refusing to accept it. They're not forthcoming with an agreement to the ceasefire. And the question is, why is that? Why is Hamas waiting on Israel to confirm it was accepting a ceasefire by the U.S. before accepting it or before rejecting it?
Okay. First of all, we have to separate the Palestinians from Hamas. So I want to stick with Hamas and Israel, because Palestinians want peace. It's Hamas that don't want peace. Okay. Now, back to your question. I said earlier that Israel did not need to confirm it. It has been passed by the UN Security Council. It was proposed by the US, and Israel was ready to accept. Now, what happened is that, or what happened was that Hamas did not just wait for Israel to confirm whether it owns it, whether it was coming from it, whether it was ready to accept it. What happened was that Hamas made a counter proposal by demanding for the immediate withdrawal of all Israeli troops from Gaza. And this is against the UN-backed peace proposal, which called for a 6 weeks temporary ceasefire in the first instance. They are in 3 phases. In the first instance, it called for a 6 months ceasefire, full ceasefire, cessation of hostilities, to allow the release of a number of hostages, including Americans. The number wasn't specified, and the release of a number of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli detention, jail. The number was not specified. That's in the first instance. And to allow for the daily flow of at least 600 humanitarian aid trucks into Gaza. Now, and then Hamas is asking for permanent ceasefire and withdrawal of Israeli forces. Mind you, the Biden or UN-backed, UN Security Council-backed ceasefire was also calling for what we call in international relations confidence-building measures. When you see hostages going this way, prisoners coming this way, no fighting for 6 weeks, it brings a lot of confidence that both parties are ready to end the conflict.
Yeah, but the proposals by the two of them look very similar. The proposal of the UN-backed, that's the UN-backed ceasefire proposal, and that of Hamas, which you've just tried to explain, they look similar. They're almost the same things.
No, they are not. They are not at all. Why the UN Security Council backed proposal is asking for 3 phases, starting with 6 weeks cessation of hostilities, yes. Temporary ceasefire, right? And okay, very importantly, the withdrawal of Israeli forces from densely populated areas in Gaza. The Hamas counter offer is asking for total, complete withdrawal of Israeli forces or IDF
from Gaza.
From Gaza.
Right. Okay.
So the other one is a partial withdrawal from densely populated areas.
But that's to happen in stages, right? I mean, the UN-backed proposal is,
in the first stage, I was about to go to the second stage.
Okay.
Right? And now, if Hamas, it says, I think, okay, I don't want to quote. It says, if Hamas lives up to his commitment. So that phrase, if Hamas lives to his commitment, tells you that this is coming from Israel. It didn't say if Israel lives up to his commitment. So it said that's a caveat. There's a caveat which will lead to the second phase. He said, if Hamas lives to his commitment.
Because the reassurance now should come from Hamas, right?
Yes. So that tells you where it's flowing from, where the proposal is flowing from. If Hamas lives to his commitment within the first 6 weeks, then there will be a second phase where there will be ceasefire. To enable all hostages. Remember, in the first phase, a number of hostages, a number of
aid trucks.
prisoners.
Yeah, okay. And then the
Yes.
8 trucks.
Now, and 600 aid trucks daily. Now, the second phase, if Hamas lives up to its commitments in the first phase, there will be the ceasefire becomes permanent. So, what Hamas is asking in the first phase should be what the proposer is asking for in the first phase, and all hostages would be released. Then the remaining hostages will be released, and then Israel will withdraw from Gaza. And for me, that's very sensible. In my study of, I've studied of research at least 98% of all the major conflicts in the world, especially with the management of the hostilities from high intensity to medium intensity to low intensity to cessation of hostilities. That is management before we go into a resolution of the underlying causes of the conflict. So in all of this, I've never seen anywhere you achieved or permanent ceasefire was achieved at the first instance. It's a gradual process. So the UN security back resolution is comprehensive, it's sensible. It should be accepted by anyone who genuinely wants peace. But like I said before, what is the intention of Hamas? And is Hamas acting alone? Is Hania acting alone? Is Yahya Sinwar acting alone? Can they act without authorization from Iran? Hamas is in the south. So this is an orchestrated, well-articulated plan headed by Iran. By the way, I was having a conversation with a colleague from Lebanon, and I said to him, because he is a supporter of Hamas, I said to him, you know that this is not all about Palestinians and Gazans. It's more than that. Otherwise, Hamas would have accepted the peace deal. Hamas will not be endangering the lives of its citizens. Hamas will not be stationing its weapons and launching attacks against Israel from refugee areas, from highly populated areas, from humanitarian safe zones, safety zones. They wouldn't be endangering the lives of these people if it's all about the people. What is it all about? After much argument, he agreed with me that it's not about Gaza. He agreed. In fact, I put it to him that for people like him and Hamas, the lives of it's not about the lives of the Gazans. It's about religion. Yeah, he agreed with me that the fight is to reclaim the holy sites, the Islamic holy sites. So Gaza is just a dressing hazard. The main target is Jerusalem.
Thank you so much, for your analysis and for, the salient points that you drew out of this. Hamas being an ideology is targeted at, you said, maybe even killing civilians in the process of this war. And the Israeli government has been doing what it can. The Israeli government has been doing what it can to avoid, these civilian casualties. Unfortunately, these people are in the line of fire. Thank you again for speaking with us.
Well, can I end with one? Can you allow me to end with one? Because it's very dear to me.
Go on.
Human life cannot be vitiated by any political, economic, or military consideration, especially the lives of non-combatants. It cannot be vitiated or compromised by any consideration. I'm an apostle of the Geneva Convention. human life is sacred. The sanctity of human life, especially non-combatant, must be preserved. The way the world is going now is dangerous. If you look at what is happening in Ukraine, what is happening in Gaza, and other places, the world is gradually losing its humanity. Non-combatants are being targeted and killed and placed in harm's way. The world cannot continue that way. We must go back to rediscover our humanity. Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Dr. Chukwunaru.
Thank you for having me.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says if Moscow pulls out of all of Ukrainian territory, then peace talks can resume as soon as possible. And that's in contrast to what the Russian President Vladimir Putin had in mind during the week.
And one countries and international organizations.
The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said at the closing of a summit for peace in Switzerland that Kyiv will hold peace talks with Russia as early as the next day if Moscow pulls out of all Ukrainian territory. He said Russian President Vladimir Putin would not end the war and had to be stopped in any way we can, whether by military or diplomatic means.
We already have preliminary agreements with countries such as France, Czechia, Turkey, Kenya, Saudi Arabia and the United States, Norway, Poland, Canada, Qatar, Chile, Ghana, Finland, Netherlands, Germany, United Kingdom, to host the work of the groups, to lead and co-lead. And we invite all countries that recognize the binding nature of the UN Charter as the basis for the cooperation of nations to participate in groups and express their ideas and proposals.
But while leaders expressed a range of positions at the Ukraine Peace Summit in Bergenstock on Saturday, as French President Emmanuel Macron claimed that nobody in the room was in war with Russia.
We have the Ukrainian peace plan in front of us.
Turkey's foreign minister expressed concern over deepening fault lines globally, and Kenya's president accused the EU and the US of hypocrisy over seizure of Russian assets.
We have gathered here and we are reminded by the Indian statesman Mahatma Gandhi, who said that an eye for an eye will make humanity blind. Just as Russia's invasion of Ukraine was unlawful and unacceptable, the unilateral appropriation of Russia's assets is equally unlawful, unacceptable, and a derogation from the UN Charter, especially for those of us who believe in freedom, justice, and democracy.
Moscow has repeatedly described the seizure of Russian assets as illegal and said any attempt to do so would be met with legal action, and warned of the impact on the economy, image and reputation of the EU, where most of the frozen assets are held. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan noted that the conflict is fueling polarization at global levels, while French President Emmanuel Macron called for a follow-up on the summit in order to build momentum for the Ukrainian-led formula to avoid competing peace initiatives and in the hope of creating a set of key requirements of the global community that could be put on the table vis-a-vis Russia.
Come from next to Russia, you must also understand that
Finland's President Alexander Stubb explained the concern among Russia's neighbors.
Russia invaded Finland in World War II. We lost 10% of our territory, including the land where my grandparents were born and where my father was born. This is why the reaction from our side has been so vehement.
Requested by Kyiv and despite the exclusion of Russia, the summit aims to foster broad international support and comprehensive consultation aligned with the UN Charter to bring about a peaceful resolution to the ongoing conflict. Russian President Vladimir Putin had said on Friday that Moscow is ready to resume peace talks with Kyiv at any time and set out terms for a ceasefire.
He stressed that Russia does not seek a temporary freeze, but a complete end to the conflict in Ukraine, provided its conditions are met. President Putin's terms for a negotiated end to the conflict in Ukraine include disarming and denazifying Kyiv, which must then remain neutral and non-aligned, protect the country's Russian-speaking population, while Crimea, Donetsk People's Republic, Luhansk People's Republic, as well as Kherson and Zaporizhia regions must be recognized as being part of Russia, and all Western sanctions against the country must be lifted. However, advisor to the head of the Ukrainian presidential office, Mikhailo Podolyak, said that the conditions did not represent a real peace proposal, while the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky noted it as an ultimatum. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg noted that acceptance would mean that Russia should achieve their war claims.
Erase borders and annex.
The U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said Putin was not in a position to dictate to Ukraine in any peace process.
This is where we end Diplomatic Channel this week. I'm Amarachi Ubani. I'll see you next time.